Hi everyone. So I couldn't participate this week in the video discussion, but I thought you guys had a really great conversation. I did take some notes while I was watching just because I can't remember all of it. um, so starting from the beginning with the first study, it was a paired choice preference test, and they ended up with the stimuli that were highly and lowly preferred. There was definitely a hierarchy preference of staff members, and the procedures used to identify the hierarchy were choosing gummy bears in a cup. Um, I really agreed with Kara and Samantha that it may not have been the most effective way to determine which staff they preferred. It may have been more random than intentional, and the extraneous variables definitely could have come into play with the children when they were choosing which staff member they wanted to go with. Um, it can be a complex directive with multiple steps for the children, and the students may not have fully understood or discriminated which staff member they preferred. I agree that it was a very different way of determining preferred staff. It also kind of seemed like a quick and easy directive for the children to choose instead of the teachers breaking it down into smaller steps. The higher preferred staff were paired with the low preferred items, and then they switched it and did the pairing with the low preferred staff with the high preferred items, which I thought was really different and interesting. Even though it was confusing, it was still somewhat effective. Um, the peer pressure can definitely come into play and affect the potential outcome of any study where it's in the environment. And I like how you guys discussed the effects of social media and branding or product placement, because that's a great example of how those types of pressures come into play. I agreed with Kara and Ginger too that most kids in school come home and want the same clothes or toys as the cool kids, because we were all there at some point. We all wanted to do that too. The preferences shifted to the more positive staff members with the low preference items, which was an interesting idea, and I agreed with the general notion that I'd use it in practice down the road as well. I also agreed with Dr. Dudley that there are a lot of students who could use, or a lot of adults who could use pairing, commenting, modeling to determine shift preferences. And using the toys in modeling definitely affected the outcome, I think. I also agreed with Caitlin that if they were playing with the items enthusiastically, the children were more likely to want to play with that item or the staff member. I also agreed with Dr. Dudley that introducing the activity should play more of a part when carrying out these types of studies before just throwing it into a preference assessment. Ginger also made a valid point regarding modeling the toys for children, because that is ultimately how they learn to use or play with them. And it's especially beneficial for children with autism, as it can expand their repertoire. For study number 2, I agreed with Kara that many times we put ourselves in the place of the participant and can have very strong feelings about it, which is very good because then we understand how they feel in the situation. And the study with the chimpanzees and the cucumbers with the grapes was pretty funny. It was also a great example of observational learning. The books definitely became reinforcers for the participants in the second study because the books became the reinforcing value. I think that they may have chosen the books because, like Jesse said, it was a neutral stimulus. And Samantha made a valid point about the books aiding in the students' academic repertoire, such as reading. And I agreed with Caitlin that it may have increased the flexibility of what the students could turn their tokens in for. I've personally seen a teacher in a classroom where I worked use a pacifier as a reinforcer for a child listening and not climbing on unsafe objects around the room. Each time he would attempt to climb, the teacher would tell him if he climbed on it, he would not get his pacifier. Because he had a deep bond with his pacifier for comfort, he would immediately stop, run over, and she would give it right to him, even though it wasn't his nap time. The parents did not want him using his pacifier outside of nap time and had trouble with him at home because he was expecting it whenever he listened to them. It ultimately became a pretty significant issue that the school had to deal with between the parents and the teacher, and the transition was very difficult for the child both at home and at class with us, it was much more difficult for me to try and wean him off of that after the other teacher was moved to a different classroom. I think instead of using items like that, naturalistic reinforcers are a great alternative for establishing reinforcers. And I agreed with Ginger that the cost of toys as reinforcers are not as beneficial as naturalistic reinforcers. And I also agreed with Dr. Dudley that there should be some type of follow up to ensure that the books are still, in fact, an effective reinforcer even after the study.